Everybody, Scott Burnside back for the first edition of the Suitcase and the Scribe 2022. Mike McKenna, looking well lit as always. You always look better lit than me. I'm gonna have to get this figured out here. But I feel I got the light on and everything. But you always look great, my friend. And
I appreciate
happy
that.
New Year to you and your family. So
yeah, to you as well. It's this obviously podcast format, but some people will be able to see the video. But I do have in my closet that I record natural lighting. I have, and I don't know why, a window with blinds in the closet, and I can adjust the natural lighting on the fly to give myself some nice forward-facing light. So
yeah,
that's how presentation's everything, Scott.
I got a light on here too, but
you look beautiful. Did you have?
I feel like I have that mood lighting now, as opposed to the So anyway, well, so how was your? We spoke, of course, between Christmas and New Year. You were getting ready for New Year. We were getting ready for the Winter Classic. How was New Year? Do you celebrate do you have a big New Year thing for the McKenna family? And of course, with the Blues playing in Minnesota for the Winter Classic, was there some excitement in the household? Like, was that a big deal for you guys?
Scott, I can't stand New Year's. I've never liked it. I think it relates back to being the unwanted kid in high school that couldn't end up with the date at midnight. You know what I mean? And I think it just, it just for years and years was a holiday I couldn't stand. I thought New Year's resolutions were hollow. I thought that we were just fooling ourselves by saying, I'm going to go work out every day. No one ever follows through on anything. And I don't know, I came to not like it. Well, the Winter Classic did breathe some life into my outlook on New Year's, and especially my family's. It's something that we congregate around the TV and we watch.
Yeah.
And this year had a little bit more to it because the Blues were in the Winter Classic against Minnesota. My kids do like the Blues. I mean, they like a lot of teams though, Scott.
Yeah.
They like a lot of teams that I played for. They kind of they're kind of evenly split between Dallas, Philly, and the Blues. And Dallas and Philly because those were two of my later teams that they enjoyed. And then, St. Louis being the hometown team. So yeah, we sat around, we watched the Winter Classic. I had 3 monitors set up because we had the Winter Classic on one.
Yeah.
We had WWE Day One pay-per-view on another. And then I had the St. Lawrence Skating Saints on my iPad on my third screen. So there was a lot going on, Scott. And I'm curious for you though. One, what the Winter Classic was for you this year, what it meant, and what you may have enjoyed about it. And 2, I also want to just quickly ask, what'd you think about there being 8 other games scheduled on the same day?
Yeah, no, I'll answer that one first. I did it, and I was frankly a bit surprised, and I wish
it was a Saturday.
Yeah,
I know it's a ratings monster, but still, I don't know.
Yeah, I wish I knew more about the intricacies of the respective TV deals. Of course, the Winter Classic on TNT. I love the idea that it was at night, and I covered from 2008, the first one in Buffalo, to 2015. Let's say that's right. And I think that was maybe one of the best games of the Winter Classic games. And I covered some other outdoor games as well, including one at Dodger Stadium that I think stands as my favorite. But I digress. But my memory serves that the Winter Classic was always a standalone product when it was on NBC, that it was, the deal was no other games infringed on that property. When I thought that was smart, right? Like, why?
And it was a full day,
Yeah. Well, exactly. And for the most part. So anyway, I was digressing because I like the idea that the Winter Classic this year was on at night. I think it looks great. And I think just having covered the games, when you try and have them in the afternoon, you court disaster all the time, because one of the great inhibitors to getting the game off is direct sunlight. Like, people think it's too warm. As I mentioned, I covered an outdoor game between the Ducks and the Kings at Dodger Stadium. Again, an evening game. And it was like 50. It was outstanding. Kiss played. There's a picture somewhere of Gene Simmons with Gary Bettman in the headlock. It's off the charts. But it's not the temperature. It's the sun, to a lesser degree, the wind. and the rain, obviously, if it rains, but the sun is key. So I liked it that it was Saturday night. I was surprised that there were other games sort of cluttering things up, and maybe TNT doesn't care. I don't know, but I thought it was weird. But I felt a bit nostalgic that I haven't, it's been a while since I covered one. Yeah. And the cold there was like, man, but that's part of it, right? Like
it's what it should be.
Why.
It's a celebration of winter and the great northern game. And but what's funny, Scott, is I loved the Dallas game so much.
Yeah.
For the uniqueness of it and the horses and all of that.
Yeah, I think races, weren't there pigs there?
Yes, absolutely. There were. It was like a county fair or a state fair. But I think that that's important to have variety.
Yeah.
I really do. And that's why, like, the Dallas game and some of the other outdoor games that have been played, California, you name it. But I think the root of it, the core of it, Scott, is what we saw on New Year's Day. Is it not? The cold, the snow, the pond hockey field. Like, it was a perfect setting. And Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, the NHL needed this, didn't it?
Yeah, totally. I'm with you entirely. And I know it's taken a long time for the state of hockey to host the Winter Classic. Now they had a Stadium Series game, which I think you and I talked about. I covered it, Minnesota and Chicago back in 2016. And it was okay. It wasn't great. Minnesota sucked. They just fired Mike Yeo. It wasn't a great event, frankly. This, you're right. I think everyone, hockey fans, I felt I needed it, to have fun. I felt I feel sort of bad for the Wild that, like, hello, there's a game here. You might want to show up before the third period. But they give up 5 in the second. And you know what I loved about the Blues? I loved how they embraced it. I loved the idea they showed up in their beach wear. And I was like, yes, totally have some fun.
No one expected that.
Nobody. No, it was great.
Yeah.
And like that Blues team, they're starting to cook. They're healthier now than they've been probably all year. There's a nice swagger about that team that does put me in mind of after Craig Berube took over for Mike Yeo. And I know back in 19 at this time, they were still technically probably in last place. But if they really started to hum, obviously, and en route to their first ever cup. I see that in this Blues team right now. Do you buy any of that?
Yeah, I completely do. I mean, the fun factor is the first thing I notice. Yeah. Bennington shows up in a $1,400 Versace shirt. One of the dudes has a pineapple in a cooler, and it's -6, man. Like, they went all in, because if you go and you lose this game, every Twitter warrior out there is going to be saying they were too worried about what they were wearing to the game. They should have been focused on the game. And no, man, they were loose. They had fun. And Minnesota showed up in varsity jackets. Boring. Like, I get it. It's the state of hockey. Okay. It fit.
Yeah.
But it really fit the conservative culture of that club in some ways that they've had for so long, and it's like, man, you really could have embraced this somehow, and the Blues got it, and they look like the team that was loosest to start the game.
Yeah.
And this has been a problem for Minnesota. They have been starting slow.
Yeah.
For the last, I don't know. Well, we went on pause for how long, but they've been slow to start games lately, and that's been crushing them, because they're a good team with good players that can hang in games. They can come from behind. I mean, they made it a game. Yeah. You get Kaprizov going, anything could happen. He was on the big stage here. This was a coming out party for him. But St. Louis does have that swag. And this is, I believe, today to be the anniversary of Jordan Binnington's first start with the Blues. And this is the 4th of January. So if it's not today, the 4th, it may be tomorrow on the 5th, one of the two. Because I was on the bench for the Philadelphia Flyers with a backup towel in Philadelphia, and I got to watch that game before they went on the big run.
Nice.
And
okay. I didn't know that.
Footnote in history, And I remember thinking, man, good game by that kid. He had a shutout in Philadelphia. It was like 24, 26 shots. And then they go on and win the Stanley Cup. Yeah. But they had that swagger to them. And I think that their identity has been beat up a little bit. You lose Petro, Steen retires. People forget how important he was in that team. Other players have been in and out. But St. Louis now has recaptured some of that.
Jay Bouwmeester.
Yeah. Yes. And, they've they've done a great job, and I think Doug Armstrong deserves a lot of credit for this.
Yeah.
Of trusting his young players to grow into their roles and believe in them and not go shopping at every moment you had to. Like, I think he did on the back end, which was smart. You bring in Falk and Krug. Those were preemptive. Falk particularly with preemptive measure in case Petro leaves. Like, you had to.
Yeah.
And they look smart now with that.
Yeah.
Because St. Louis, I do worry about the fact that they're still playing rope-a-dope a bit. They get out to start games and then they just let Binnington take over at the end. I'm not sure how long you can run that, but he is a good closer.
Yeah.
So St. Louis is good, Scott. And Jordan Kyrou.
Wow.
4 points, best player in the game. He does everything at speed.
Yeah.
His head is up. He can finish. He's on the edge of being a star in this league. I think he already is, and everybody doesn't know it yet.
Yeah.
Because Tarasenko is playing some of the best hockey of his career, and Kyrou is the guy who stands out the most in the Blues right now.
Yeah. I'm really impressed with that team. We've talked about it a little bit, but that was a team that I had a lot of questions about going into the season. And frankly, I wondered if Craig Berube would be here in January. Because I just, Doug Armstrong understands I hate to, the cliche of the window, but this is a team that, hasn't looked like 19 since 19 really. And and again, there's a certain amount of patience, and this is going to be a great segue because we're going to talk about a team that, man, is right in the crosshairs right now in terms of patience and what do you do. But I agree with you on Doug Armstrong. He's created an organization that has lots of moving parts. He's got lots of tools for Craig Berube to work with. Robbie Thomas is another guy that I remember doing a story on him early in the, I guess it wasn't that early. I guess it was the Western Conference Final at the start against San Jose. And, a guy who Doug Armstrong told me the story about how he could have gone back and played for Canada at the World Juniors and told Doug, I don't want to go. And the team, of course, the Blues were playing at that point, they were terrible. Yeah. And Doug thought it might be good for him to go back and play, have some success and be a leader on that World Junior team. And Robbie Thomas said, I don't want that. I want to help this team turn it around. And, it's been a little bit up and down for him. He's had some injuries, but I think, again, he's another young player that has all kinds of tools. And we're seeing that a lot this season. Kyrou is a great example. Yeah. Pavel Buchnevich, a great ad.
Good trade.
That's a smart team. So let me ask you before we move on, we'll talk about the Edmonton Oilers. But when you look at the Central now, as we head into, we're getting closer and closer, even with the COVID pauses and the postponements, teams are, we're getting closer to midpoint. Mm-hmm. Do you lock the Blues into a playoff spot? Can you lock Minnesota into a playoff spot? You've got Colorado. I don't know. What do you make of the Central?
It's pretty fluid, but I think the teams at the pointy end are going to stay there. I picked Winnipeg to win the Cup, and I'm not sure where Winnipeg is. Yeah. Run and gun, high scores, not quite what I'm used to seeing from them. Yeah. They sped up their defense and made them more mobile. Well, now pucks are going the other direction. So I really think I'd be shocked if it didn't end up being Colorado, St. Louis, Minnesota as top. I've been very pleasantly surprised by Nashville. I think everybody has, and they've been red hot. Yeah. But I think that they're due for a market correction, as they say in economic terms. Okay. I have to be proven that Nashville can continue this. And I know I rag on them a lot, but they've got to have their top players continue to play so well. And I think that they're going to have to give David Rittich some more minutes down the stretch here than just Saros all the time. You can't just run Saros into the ground. But St. Louis, yes. If they play the way they are with their top players now, they have through the lineup they're producing. It seems pretty deep, and they have been missing players for a lot of this year. I mean, Perron's back now with O'Reilly. That's dynamic. St. Louis will be there, and they're a Cup contender. Minnesota, the last month has made me question them. But I still think that they're there. I think that they'll be fine. But Talbot out hurts. He's out indefinitely. Yeah. Kakkonen has been okay. There's parts
never plays, though. The kid never gets a shot.
Exactly.
So
and that makes me That makes me nervous there.
Yeah.
And Colorado, I mean, they got 35 games in hand because of COVID right now. You know, I mean, they're leading in points percentage. They're still the horse into the Central, but I think St. Louis will be right there. I think Minnesota and Nashville will probably be battling it out for that last spot if you're not looking at the wild card. Yeah.
As you know, any team I write about, I instantly become, as my Pierre LeBrun always called it, I get the Stockholm syndrome. So I'm all, I wrote about the Predators last week. Yes, so they're right there. I'm like you, I'm really curious about Winnipeg. And it's a great segue. It's great working with a pro that provides these segues. You know, Minnesota, as we speak today, and we're talking about the wild card spot, Jets are 3 points back of the Edmonton Oilers with 2 games in hand. The LA Kings, I believe, now I have it up here, so I'm just going to tell you, I'm not even going to guess. Colorado currently in the first wild card spot, but as you point out, they have 20 games in hand, and they're going to lock into one of those top 3 spots. Edmonton technically in the second wild card spot. LA 1 point back, and as I mentioned, Winnipeg 3 points back with 2 games in hand. And I honestly, maybe, I don't know if you feel the same way, but and we had this earlier with Vancouver, you're watching a team, certainly Edmonton, high expectations, certainly after the first 20 games. It truly is like watching a train wreck.
In slow motion. Yeah.
You can't turn away. Now, team their last 12, coming off a 4-1 loss in New York to the Rangers. They've got a game Wednesday, I think, in Toronto, and like the Oiler Nation they are up in arms. And I wonder, like, when you're watching, because now I watch with the idea what will happen. Does something have to happen, or does Kenny Holland, the GM, can you just ride this out and assume at some point to use your term, market correction? This is a better team than 2-8-2, aren't they? Or maybe they're not. I don't know. What do you make of all this?
Their top 2 lines might be.
Yeah.
There's a black hole at the 3rd or 4th line. I mean, Derek Ryan has like 2 points. Kyle Turris has like 1 point, 1.5 points. Like, and I'm not like, your bottom lines. It's the same problems that everybody saw at the start of the year. And I mean, Duncan Keith is he 38 years old, and Cody Ceci, those are your stopgap defenders to come in, and they're not the elite defenders in the league. But the team, to me, more than personnel, just doesn't play hard enough. I mean, I heard Draisaitl say after the game in Long Island that they lost in overtime. Well, thought we played pretty well. Happy to get the point and move on. You guys have sucked for the last month. If you're happy to get a point against the Islanders and move on, I'm starting to think, Scott, they just don't get it.
Yeah.
Because you can't, you look at the video, man, look at the other teams. Look how hard teams are pressuring McDavid and Draisaitl, how tight their gaps are. I mean, teams have figured out how to beat them. You protect the middle of the ice. You keep those guys to the outside. You don't even have to, you just match up against their top lines. You don't even have to worry about their bottom lines for Edmonton.
It's true.
And if you play tight on McDavid, if you keep him, from wheeling through the neutral zone and exposing the middle of your ice and stay out of the penalty box, which teams are doing a better job of, you're in good shape. And they haven't adapted. Like, they don't play hard enough on the defensive side of puck to get it back for 5-on-5 hockey.
Yeah.
I mean, the Oilers should be a dynamic 5-on-5 team, and they're not right now.
No.
And with two of the best players in the world, the most skilled player in the world, hands down.
Yeah.
And Scott, I can't help but look at this team and think, first, they don't believe in their goalies at all right now.
Yeah.
And it was a tough game for Mikko Koskinen against the Rangers. I mean, he comes out, he fires one over the glass in the first 3 minutes, penalty kill right off the bat, and then he gives one away.
Yeah.
And it's like, man, like, I felt bad for the guy, but in the same respect, I'm like, dude, you just can't make 2 mistakes like that in a row to start a game like that. Yeah. Like, your team was done right there because of the confidence factor. So they don't believe on the back end. Smith, who knows if Mike Smith's ever going to be healthy again? Let's just be honest with that. Yeah. Who knows? I mean, Skinner's been their best goalie, but he's a rookie. So you're question marks. Like, I don't know where they go with that. And I think that, man, like they're just lost right now. And when you watch, like McDavid doesn't kill penalties.
Yeah.
I don't think he back checks hard. I don't think he plays. Maybe Torts was right. Okay. Maybe John Tortorella was right about this, that McDavid does need to change the way he plays. And that's not offensively. He doesn't need to change how he plays offensively.
Yeah.
But he's got to lead the charge and get the puck back on the Oilers stick. And it has to filter through the locker room.
Yeah.
I'm not in that room. I can't say what it's like. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it sure looks like right now this team is rudderless, and you look to leadership. And where is it?
That's, it's a hard thing. And that, the marketplace is so passionate, and they're so, their hockey, the fan base IQ pretty high there. Yes. And I'll tell you, like every day it's, why is Dave Tippett still coaching? And listen, I've known Dave a long time. I think he's a good coach. I don't know what's going on there.
If a team can't play defense with Dave Tippett coaching, it's not the coaching staff.
Yeah.
Okay. I played for Dave Tippett in Arizona when we were terrible defensively, and we were trotting out a lineup that was at the bottom of the salary cap. And that's why we couldn't play defense.
Yeah.
No slag on the teammates. I didn't help at all whatsoever, but we were not skilled enough to compete.
Yeah.
Edmonton is skilled enough to compete.
Yeah.
They just don't want to right now. And I don't know how you fix that.
Yeah. Well, and so I just think that, this is to me the fascinating, you sort of take the macro view of this. So your team, like we saw what Vancouver did, right? But Vancouver, different lineup, different dynamic, but man, they cleared the decks, right? Fire your GM in the middle of the season, fire your coach, right? Like there has to be, if you're an Oiler fan, you're like, Vancouver's like 8-0-1 now under Bruce Boudreau, or 7-0-1. They've taken every point but one that's possible since that's happened, and now they're back in, still a road to climb, but they're in the playoff hunt. And oh my gosh, what if they take that spot from Edmonton? Can you imagine? But so how do you, like, to me, these are the critical moments for ownership in Edmonton, for upper management in Edmonton, for Kenny Holland. I mean, you mentioned the faith in the goaltenders being non-existent, and that's the reality, and it does impact how you play. So, can you make that kind of move? The easy thing is to fire your coach, but what I always say this: you want to do that, okay? You want to fire Dave Tippett, that's fine. What's the answer? Is it Mike Babcock? I mean, Kenny Holland has that relationship, won a cup, a lot of baggage for Mike Babcock. Is he the answer? Is it, from within the organization? Is it Glenn Gulletson? Like, you can't, like, Bruce Boudreau, it makes sense.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you, because this is critical now, or do you do anything? Like, that's the fascinating part for me.
Yeah, it's not going to come from within. I played for Glenn Gulletson. I think he was the best coach I ever played for. He was at the Las Vegas Wranglers of the ECHL.
Yeah.
It's a different dynamic.
Yeah.
And I don't think that in the NHL stage, I mean, Gully's had a couple cracks, Dallas, Calgary, and they've gone okay. I don't think he has the fear factor that maybe is necessary at that level.
Yeah.
And my gosh, I can't believe it. But when somebody mentioned Babcock the other day, I just went, oh man, this actually kind of would make sense here. Because honestly, I don't want it to make sense. Like, from the way the players were treated to some of the podcasts and interviews I've heard afterwards, how flippant he's been to media members and other folks and defiant about what he's done. I don't want him to coach again, but I tell you what, they need somebody to come in and crack a whip. And it's like, it might work with these guys. And he has a track record of working well with top end players. I don't know if it's the right answer. I mean, to me, I think you need to shake the room up and put somebody on waivers that doesn't expect it.
Yeah.
Like Dallas did that with Blake Como. And I know it was a bit of a salary cap play too, but like, you want to shake up a locker room, flush away somebody that matters.
Yeah. Well,
right?
James, I don't think James Neal probably factors into that, as in that sense, but and what about John Tortorella? Like, I don't like, I'm with you. And I guess to me, the disappointing part of this, and again, I've known Dave Tippett a long time. He's a good coach, right?
Yeah,
maybe just this is time. I don't know, but maybe it's toward, but where has the leadership been? And not just this season, when they were down 3-0 to Winnipeg in the first round, where is the leadership that pulls you up off the mat? Where is the leadership that, when they lost to Chicago in the play-in round, an absolute mismatch, a Chicago team that would have had no business being in the playoffs were it not for the expanded COVID playoffs. Where's the leadership been in those moments to drive this team forward? And, it took a long time, sure, but we've seen what Alex Ovechkin has done in a critical moment. Ryan O'Reilly in St. Louis. We've seen Bergeron in Boston. We have
Steven Stamkos one shift.
Yes, totally. Yes. And
Jamie Benn wills his team to the Stanley Cup Finals in Dallas.
Yes. Where has that leadership been in Edmonton? And I got to tell you, it has been nowhere. And you can blame the construct of the team and you can blame the coaching decisions. Those are factors. But I got to tell you, two of the best players in the world, and they have accomplished very, very little in critical moments. And that's, to me, that's just the reality of that.
It is. And I always say this, unless you're in the room, you don't know what's going on. You don't know who should be the captain. So I'm not going to throw this at the feet of McDavid and just say McDavid.
Yeah.
But everything that you've just mentioned screams lack of leadership in the room.
Yeah.
Now, is that on one player? Of course not.
No.
But one player can set the tone. And somebody's got to set the tone. And I get it. Like, you get a generational player, you slap the C on them. You get somebody with a big contract, you slap the C on them. It's just what teams do.
Yeah.
But there's been plenty of teams in history that have had a captain that really wasn't as much of a captain as you think. Okay.
Yeah.
Like, it can be an honorary title. And you can have two leaders. I mean, talk to anybody associated with the Blues. Pietrangelo was the captain of that team, but Ryan O'Reilly, I mean, you take your pick who your leader was, right? Like, that's critical. And I haven't seen it. And I think a lot of this, Scott, I think it's just the culture of that team. They have not drafted well. I mean, they haven't developed from within well. They don't have hardly anything of an analytics department to uncover hidden gems of players like some teams do.
Sure.
Like, I don't see Edmonton making a move for Chandler Stevenson to get him from the Capitals as a fifth rounder. That hasn't happened.
Yeah.
It's not a progressive organization.
Yeah.
Look at the last all the hires. It has not been progressive. So I think they got to get with the times and modernize. And I don't know if that's going to happen this year. That's an off-season task.
I want to, before we move on, I just want to, again, sort of the macro thing, because I always, I'm so curious, given your experience in your, you've been in dressing rooms. I have a lot. But, and it's easy. Here's what the thing that I'm trying to think if I've written it. I don't know. Maybe I did, maybe more than once, but this notion that somehow a coach loses a room. And I'm like, okay, so is it under some papers in his office? Like, where, but I'm curious about your experience. And, I think that's what was said of Travis Green in that Vancouver locker room. And, is it true in Edmonton with Dave Tippett? And it happens. It's not a new phenomena, but like, did you play on teams where when the coach came in or when the coaching staff was putting together a game plan, I don't care if you want to name people. That's why I'm not looking you to throw people under the bus per se, but I'm curious, that dynamic, is it real? Is it real, a real thing where guys are sitting in a room and when the coaches leave, they're like, we have no chance of winning given this plan, or there's no respect, or there is this complete disconnect? Like, that must be a horrible thing if it happens.
Yeah, because the coach comes in and everybody listens to the spiel and then they roll their eyes.
Yeah.
And that's not a good place to be. I
Yeah.
mean, and you almost wish that coaches would be more receptive to it. A lot of times this happens when coaches are not good communicators with their players.
Yeah.
And they don't have to be. Okay. You don't have to be a great communicator with your players, but you need a pulse of it. And you got to understand if your players are believing or not. You know, I mean, remember when the Uber video came out with the Ottawa Senators, and one of the lines was Matt Duchene saying, "I haven't listened in a month," or whatever, on the power play, I think it was.
Yes. Yep.
And that happens. Like, it really sucked that got caught on tape and put out there. But like, yeah, players talk like that. That's real.
Yeah.
But that's not normal. Okay. That it doesn't get to that point very often.
Right.
You know, and that's when you really have a problem, is that they're just straight up not listening at all. And the coach comes in and he's draws something on the board, and then everybody just goes, "All right, dude." Like, you got it, man. Like, it's pretty rare. I mean, I did, you know, I know enough people around Vancouver that, yeah, it's just for whatever reason, they quit listening.
Yeah.
And once they quit listening, you don't get them back. But how many head coaches does Ottawa need, or does Edmonton need right now? Like, how many have they had in the past since McDavid's been there?
Yeah.
You know, it's just,
yeah,
you're looking for answers. And I think it's just been lineup more than anything. They've had some pretty good coaches there, and, you know, they can't make anything go of it. So it's frustrating to see, Scott, because I root for these markets. I root for these Canadian markets, man. Their fans, everybody else, like, the fans are brutal, but it's because they're so passionate.
Yeah.
They just want to see a good product on the ice.
It's not a, like, I must admit, you know, back sort of in my younger days, I you know, for some reason took a perverse pleasure if if a big market team didn't have success.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember talking to a veteran reporter, and this came up in conversation, and he's like, "What?" And we were talking about the New York Rangers. I'm like, "Yeah, it looks good on them." It was before the cap, and, you know, they spent $1 gazillion. And I said, "Yeah, it looks good on them." He said, "Hang on a sec." He said, "You're a hockey writer, right? You make your living covering hockey in the NHL." He said, "Why is it good if one of the biggest markets in hockey doesn't make the playoffs? That's not a good thing, right?" I mean, you know, he wasn't arguing that they should be in. He was just saying, you're misguided if you take pleasure in that, because the game is poorer if a big market like that isn't in. Same thing. Like, I always, you know, in Toronto, people take great glee when the Leafs suck or when they fail. It's good for hockey when Toronto is relevant. And I think it's good for hockey when a team like Edmonton, and specifically when you have players like McDavid and Draisaitl, it's better for the game if they're in it. Because who doesn't want to see the best players playing? Like, how many times have we seen Ovi and Ovechkin and Sidney Crosby in the playoffs? I want it. That's appointment television. And if Edmonton falls out of it and they don't make the playoffs, and who knows what happens, you know, that I think that's something to lament, not something to celebrate. But that's just me.
No, I totally agree with you. But I think there's an added layer to this now, that, like, these Canadian markets need to succeed.
Yeah.
Because, man, they're in one right now when it comes to capacity. And Quebec, Montreal, the players in Montreal can't even get into their practice facility.
Yeah.
Locked out. Like, Ontario's going into lockdown. We're going 50% in other Canadian buildings. Like, I'm worried about these Canadian markets moving forward. Legitimately worried about them, because I'm not sure. I'm not going to go on a big COVID diatribe here, but I'm just not sure in this climate, in today's culture, in today's worry factor. Like, there's a stark difference between Canada and the United States, and it's real. And the players talk about it all the time.
Yeah.
That they're miserable. That team in Montreal is miserable. Yeah. Okay. Team sucks. Their wives, their families, they can't go anywhere. They're locked down. They can't even go to the beach. Like, if you're in Florida, you know, like, there's not much incentive for players to want to go to these Canadian teams unless they are good. They need to be good.
Yeah.
Because this free agency this summer, Scott, do you see many players looking at these Canadian teams, knowing all the restrictions, all the uncertainty, maybe going on 60-day road trips in the US, maybe, who knows, they might even move them to the US, right? Like, can you see any player objectively looking at that contract from a Canadian team when they have something that's even, like, marginally equivalent with the United States team. Can
Yeah.
you see them taking the Canadian club?
No. Well, I think you raise a good point, and it's not listen, people will. This isn't an anti-Canada thing, but it's a real thing, and
It's reality.
yeah, it's the reality, and it's been going on for years. When you look at the taxation rates, I mean, how many? I think back maybe 5 or 10 years, we probably didn't think of it in the same terms. But when we talk about free agent, I think of Steven Stamkos when he briefly hit the market, and you looked at where he could go and where, what the value and with the salary cap. If you go to a place without state tax like Texas or Nevada or Florida, that's
Washington State now.
Washington State now. Those are real factors. And then you throw in, listen, you spent some time briefly in a couple of Canadian markets, and you certainly have been in Canadian markets enough to understand that it is really different there. When we talk about Edmonton, the fan base there, it's Vancouver's its own crazy fan base too. It's a different thing. You throw in the taxation, and then I think it's such a great point. The reality over the last couple of years for players on Canadian teams is vastly different than what it's been in the United States. And I think you are absolutely right. The free agent market. Now, let me turn it back to you, and I'll ask you a question. Toronto goes to a Stanley Cup final. Maybe they win a cup. Oh my God, first time since '67. That changes it, right? And if Edmonton or with your team, Winnipeg, could happen, you go on a long run, maybe you win a cup. That does change that for a player, though, right? When you're factoring in, where should I go? Where should I make my life?
Absolutely true. And that's why I'm saying these teams need to be good.
Yeah.
If the Oilers go on a run, they start to get better, and then they go on even if they make it to the second round of playoffs, it keeps the hope alive that, hey, this is a contender. I could win a Stanley Cup. I'll take whatever else comes with it.
Yeah.
In terms of live, a lot of these players aren't really having much fun this year anyway, but the ones in Canada are having less fun.
Yeah.
We can objectively say that, away from the rink especially. But it's real. If a team wins a cup, it's real. Because if you don't have that, all you get are desperate players.
Yeah.
You get players who don't have a contract anywhere else. And we've always seen the media spin on this. Like, oh, he's so excited. He's so happy to be here. Really wanted to come here. You know why he wanted to come to your team? Because he didn't have any other options. And that contract looked pretty nice. I've seen that so many times.
Yeah. I'm so excited to be in the Canadian market.
Yeah. And
I couldn't go anywhere else.
Yeah. But man, I love Canada. Like, yeah. I tell you what, if it wasn't so cold, man, I'd love to move to Canada. Like,
me too.
Exactly. Right. But it's just the reality of this situation right now. I don't know when Canada's getting out of this, if ever. Yeah. If ever. It's just a completely different level of risk tolerance between the US and Canada.
Yeah.
And way of life. It's cultural. And so I think it's going to be tough for Canadian teams. I really do. And it makes me sad because I love that interplay. I'd love it if Winnipeg won a Stanley Cup. I'd love it if Toronto did, just because it's been so long. I'd love to see that city go crazy. I just, those moments, those heartstring moments, Scott, love them.
How was it? I get North Division. I get all the stuff. How much fun was it to have the Habs in the Stanley Cup final? And like, I remember '93 as a fan. I remember that like it was magic, and I remember it like yesterday. And yes, I'm with you. Listen. This again, we're not throwing Canadian teams under the bus because it's fun to do. It's the reality of it, and the game is going to be better overall if Canadian teams are better. But you're right. I think you have hit the nail right on the head. It's a very tough time. But you know what? You talk about fun. You know what is fun, my friend, is when someone shows up at your door with food that you have ordered, and you don't have to do anything except open it and eat it. And that is the great thing about DoorDash. DoorDash is the proud sponsor of the Nation Network of podcasts, restaurants, and more delivered right to your door. There you go. What now? What now, my friend? We're getting towards the end. I'm so excited when we get together and we chat.
Well, how about the fact that
what do you
how
want?
about the fact that we can't stop scoring goals in the NHL? Has this been wild?
Yeah.
I mean, before the holiday break, before the COVID pause that we thought was never going to happen and did,
Yeah.
goal scoring was just under 6 per game.
Yeah.
And we're close to 8 right now since coming back.
Yeah.
And the entertainment factor is pretty high.
Yeah.
The circus factor is pretty high too, Scott. Like, this is like 20 clowns show up in a VW at center ice and all pile out, And I'm curious, like, from my perspective, I think a lot of it, people have heaped it on the goalies, some of the Twitter warriors again. It's like, yeah, the goalies have been they haven't been great. And you've also got some goalies playing that are rookies that don't have much experience.
Yeah.
And it's part of it's part of COVID, basically. Like, you've got starting goalies out with COVID.
Yeah.
But doesn't this really just speak to the fact that there's so many players going in and out of lineups right now with protocol, and the fact that you just simply cannot expect non-full-time NHL players to seamlessly integrate and play the most defensive hockey you'd imagine? Doesn't that, to me, that's the biggest story with it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there is a certain exhibition schedule element to it, right? I mean, the whole, you talk about Montreal. Oh my God, how hard has that been? And you look at the lineup over the last 3 or 4 games, and great experience for those kids to get in there, but the results are what you might expect them to be. And there will be moments where teams will say, wow, I didn't know that kid was, he's a keeper, and we've learned something that we didn't know maybe, 6 months ago. But it is, and you're like, if you're a coach, you're like, okay, this roster, not sure who this kid is. I think we'll use him on the 4th line. I don't know. And then you're right. Okay, so what systems are you playing? Then you have the breakdowns, and I don't know. Watch that Pittsburgh San Jose game. Oh my God, 6-1 in the first, right?
Scott, Casey DeSmith's one of my fantasy hockey goalies. It's up 6-1, and I'm going, great. 6-5 before I know it.
I know. I was okay. Got groceries. I came home with 6-5. I said to my son, "Weird. We had DeSmith as well." So, yeah, well, no, I think this is the point of, man, as a fan and as someone in the media, and when you talk about the games, you have to understand. You have to understand it with perspective. That, this is not what we expected. It's not what teams signed on for. It's not what fans signed on for. Maybe embrace the moment, right? To me, that's it. I don't have a resolution, but if I had one, maybe that would be it. Embrace the moment in 2022.
Mine's to play a little bit more goaltender. I realized how much I missed it. I really do. I played with my dad's men's league pickup hockey on a Friday morning a couple of weeks ago, and I hadn't skated with him in like 15 years. I thought, this is still pretty cool. I was able to kind of turn it off and just enjoy it, which has been hard for me. You talked about teams learning about players. What have you learned about our new Metropolitan Division leading New York Rangers in the past couple of days? Scott, I think you got some insight you might be able to give us on why this team is cruising along right now.
I don't know if I have any insight, but I did talk to Gerard Gallant, which is great. And you know who I talked to? And I think we talked briefly, because I told you I talked to Joe Micheletti, who is St. Louis guy and just such a great guy. And watching that game last night and listening to the call, and it was crazy because the Edmonton broadcasters couldn't go because of COVID. So the Edmonton broadcast got Sam Rosen and Joe Micheletti. What a treat!
Good.
Yeah, so good. But like, I just think of, just those kids and how, Gerard Gallant just seems to, he's got the right, he's like I would have used the term in my piece, which I think is up on the site now. I would have used the term Svengali, but I thought that might have there was a negative connotation to it. But he really seems to have reached a roster that is so young and has so many young players playing critical moments. And he can bench guys, he can reduce roles, he can, things are up and down. Alexis Lafreniere, who I thought was really good last night, scored the first goal on turnover, had an assist on a really nice assist later in the game.
He was the best number 1 draft pick in that game.
Yes, he was the best. That's a good point. But he just seems, that team seems to believe wholly what Gerard Gallant and his staff bring to the table. And if it means some nights that a kid like Lafreniere or Capo Caco, the number 2 pick the year before, if you only are playing 8 minutes, that's probably because you deserve to play 8 minutes. He's not teaching you a lesson. He's not mad. He's not punishing you. He plays who deserves to play. And I will ask you this kind of question then, because how important is it to have a true, or as close as possible to a true meritocracy where the guys who play are the ones who should be playing on any given night, not the ones who make the most money, not the ones who cost the most in draft picks or were the highest picks? Like, how important is that?
It kind of relates back to what I said about Edmonton. You want to shake it up, put somebody out of the lineup. Yeah. The only way you get people's attention is when you reduce playing time.
Yeah.
That's how you get people's attention, whether they're 8 years old or whether they're 35 in the NHL.
It's true. Yes,
it is. And what I played for Turk, for Gerard Gallant. I watched him very closely with the Vegas Golden Knights while I was working for that team. And Gerard is somebody that he's always talked about as a player's coach, and he is, but he's not your best friend. Yeah. Okay. He's like that cool dad that you didn't want to make angry. That the guy was, he was cool. He was so nice. He's fantastic with your grandkids, but man, you just didn't want to make him angry because you didn't want to disappoint him.
Yes.
And that's where you can be a coach in the NHL, and you can be stern, you can be direct, you can be to the point, and you can do all that without being an asshole.
Yeah.
And that's what Gerard Gallant does so well. He's not an asshole, but he gets his point across, and it's respected. And man, like, every time you talk to somebody that's played for him, great guy, great coach. Like, it's almost like, dude, interchangeable when you text great guy, great coach, great guy, great coach.
Yep.
And he gets people to believe. And I had this premonition the other day about how unbelievable it would be to see a Vegas Golden Knights, New York Rangers Stanley Cup final.
Well, there's a couple storylines there.
Imagine Gerard Gallant and Ryan Reeves facing off against Brett Howden and the Vegas Golden Knights. One for the ages. But honestly, that would be I think that's the best storyline of the NHL if that happens. I think that would be unbelievable stuff.
I'm really curious, because sometimes this happens. Listen, as you point out, the Rangers now tied first overall for points in the league. I think they're fourth now in points percentage. They're the real deal. They're making the playoffs, right? So
they got a goalie. They can win them a Stanley Cup.
Yeah. So that's to me, that's the fascinating part, is for a team that hasn't, they lost in the play-in round to Carolina. So that doesn't really count as making the playoffs. They haven't made the playoffs in 17 in a real season.
Correct.
That's going to be that's a great storyline come April. How do you talk about taking steps? That's one step to be there. Now you're going to play, and especially in that Metro, it's so cool. Carolina's, I provide content for them, but I think they're the best team in the NHL right now. They certainly have the best points percentage. Washington, I want to ask you before we close out, I'm going to ask you about Washington and Ovi, but Washington, man, they just they're a force right now. Mm-hmm. I really love what Peter Laviolette's done there. And then the Rangers. So two of those teams are going to, unless Pittsburgh comes out of nowhere, but two of those teams are going to play each other in the first round. That's going to be fun to watch. So
yes, it is.
All right. Yeah. Before we let you go, we talked some Calder Trophy, I think, last week. And I'm curious, just before we close her out, first episode of 2022, for the last couple of years, to me, the Hart Trophy discussion has been Draisaitl, McDavid. Do you split the votes? Who's more valuable? Can you have both on your ballot? I as a voter, I wrestled with all those things. And of course,
could McKinnon hop in? That was your one question. Can he steal it, McKinnon?
Yeah. Now, lot of time yet to go. So the narrative can obviously swing back, but I think given where Edmonton's at right now, that's maybe less of a discussion when we think about the Hart Trophy midpoint of the season. Is there an obvious one? What do you think?
Dude, it's Ovi right now.
Yeah.
Like straight up, like I'm trying to think of any reason why it's not Ovi.
Truth.
I mean, Edmonton's free falling. You have to factor in the quality of the team.
Yeah.
Okay, you have to. Because if your team isn't winning games, how valuable are you?
Yeah. That's true.
Man, Ovi's 50 points, 34 games, plus 19, like still potting goals, throwing and he's not a cookie monster. Like he's playing a game hard.
Yeah.
He just, it's him straight up. But if you want to look for some dark horses right now, I said this a couple of weeks ago, I think Stamkos is lurking, and especially with Point back, Point might actually cannibalize some of the points that Stamkos has put up, but I think he's been so valuable to that team. Yeah. He's not going to win it, I don't think, unless Ovi falls off.
Yeah.
Man, Huberdeau is just sick, and nobody ever talks about this guy.
Yeah.
I do think it's funny though, because we think Ovechkin's a clear winner and he's not a centerman, and it's usually centermen that are kind of who you think of for these. And that's part of the reason why I think Huberdeau wouldn't get as much contention either, be as much in it. But like, that guy's so good and nobody talks about him.
It's interesting. The Florida thing is a little bit, it's kind of similar to what's happened in Washington because, Ovechkin's, and I'm totally with you. Like, to me, if you voted today, it would be, in my mind, total landslide for Ovechkin. Just so much to love about his game. But he's done on almost all of it without Nicholas Backstrom. The whole COVID thing that every team's gone through, but the Caps have been missing critical pieces and he has really stepped up. Barkov's missed a fair amount of time in Florida, COVID, some nagging injuries. But you're right, Huberdeau has really sort of kept that ship going. And I think those are, Stamkos the same, right? No Kucherov, of course, Point out for a long time. To me, those are, as a voter for a long time, those are really important things to me. How do you respond? Lead your team? Again, we talked about this with the Oilers, but how do you lead your team in moments of adversity and when things aren't going your way? How do you lead, and what kind of leader are you? And I think all those players that we've mentioned fit that category. So
I got one question for you. What would it take for a defenseman to get into this conversation? Is it possible?
Yeah, I think it would be I think it's funny. I was talking to Joe Micheletti and we were talking about Adam Fox, and he's better than a year ago, and he won the Norris. So
right,
and Victor Hedman has been at times over the last 3 or 4 years a player that I can't remember all my ballots, but a player that I have. Where does he fit into the Hart Trophy thing? I was looking at that today. I'm not sure there's any defenseman right now that would give you pause and would legitimately be in your top 3 right now. I don't think there's that player right now, but
you'd have to stand out that much above the rest, wouldn't you, as a defenseman?
Exactly.
Clear separation.
Same for goaltending, I think, right? I don't think it should, Carey Price was the last totally get that. He was my guy. He was just that good. I think if you're a defenseman or a goalie, you have to be having one of those generational seasons to be in that mix. Do you agree or disagree?
No, I think it's right, because it's easy to wash out. You look at the D and you go, oh, wow, there's 5 D over 30 points, and they're all pretty tight. Well, what's always hard for me, especially from the goalie's perspective, I think your defensemen are really the ones who drive the boat for your team in so many ways. And I think Cale Makar is the MVP of the Colorado Avalanche.
Yep.
I think that guy is, and they've got McKinnon, Kadri's top 10 in scoring. Like, that team is loaded with talent, but Cale Makar drives it all. He makes it go. And that's the same way with Fox in New York. Like, I don't know if New York actually really starts to take off and those young players get even better and that team starts to run away with it and Fox's totals go up, he might work his way into that conversation.
Yeah.
Because we do have some runway.
Yeah.
But I always think it's interesting because I think, D and goalies tend to get undervalued when it comes to the big trophies.
Yeah, that's true.
And it's just kind of by nature.
And I think there is this argument, fair or not, they have their own, right? You got the Vezina, you got the Norris.
Absolutely.
I think that factors into it too.
I agree. I think so. But it's fascinating to hear somebody from your perspective who has done this voting think about what goes into it. Because there are so many more factors. You don't just look at the sheet and go, oh, he's top scorer. He's the guy. It's not that simple, is it, Scott?
You shouldn't be doing that. Anyway, you hope that's not the case. So,
yeah,
brother, what a way to kick off 2022. I've had so much fun as always. I know it's going to be a great year. I'm happy to be sharing this space with you doing it. And man, it's going to be fun. So
it is.
Good work by you.
Same as always. Happy 2022, everybody.
Truth.